Despite how quiet the second half of version 2.4 seems to be, we actually have some really good characters coming out. We're going to have Jiaoqiu releasing as a new Nihility debuffer, and we're going to have Sparkle, who's easily a top 3 Harmony support character, getting her Rerun banner. And not only that, but after playing the 2.4 story quest, it's pretty clear to me that Fei Xiao has become a fan favorite character. And because of that, I think free-to-play players are going to have to make some pretty tough decisions, especially if they're like me and still kind of hurting after Firefly and all like the crazy characters we got at the beginning of 2.3 and the other Penacony updates. So today, we're going to do an analysis of Jiaoqiu's kit and Sparkle's kit, and then using that to see whether or not you should be pulling on Jiaoqiu, if you should be pulling for Sparkle, or if you should just skip them and save for something coming later. And yeah, this is going to be, I think, a kind of harder decision for free-to-plays, especially with what these two provide, plus also what we know is coming in 2.5. So let's start here with Jiaoqiu. So even though I'm not like the biggest fan of his character design, his kit design is actually really interesting, and I think he's going to be really good. So just to start out with his basic attack, just a standard basic attack is just going to damage a single enemy, so nothing super crazy on that by itself. But Jiaoqiu's real value comes from his talent, which gives him a 100% base chance to inflict 1 stack of Ashen Roast on an enemy whenever he attacks them, whether it's his basic attack, his skill, or his ultimate. And each stack of Ashen Roast will last for 2 turns. And Ashen Roast not only applies a burn dot on the start of the enemy's turn, but also will increase the amount of damage that enemy takes. And the first stack of Ashen Roast starts you at a 15% damage increase for that enemy, and then each additional stack afterwards gives an extra 5% damage taken, meaning that once you have it maxed out at 5 stacks on an enemy, Jiaoqiu will apply a 35% vulnerability debuff on those enemies. And this value is absolutely crazy because vulnerability, when you're looking at the damage calculations, it is calculated separately from your typical defense shred or defense debuffs. So if you're pairing Jiaoqiu on a team with another defense shred character like Pela, Silverwolf, Black Swan, or characters like that, you're going to see some crazy damage increases because you're not just putting on a bunch of defense shred, you're putting on defense shred and you're putting on vulnerability debuffs, which is going to be absolutely massive for the way it's calculated. Next up, for Jiaoqiu's skill, it's going to be a blast attack, so it'll hit the main target and then the adjacent targets, and you also have a 100% base chance to apply a stack of Ashen Roast to the primary target specifically, which is also good because you want to get as many stacks as possible, so having an extra chance there as well as the one on his talent to apply the Ashen Roast is going to be very good, because you do want to try to get as many stacks as you can before getting to his ultimate here, which is that when he applies his ultimate, he will set the Ashen Roast stacks of every single enemy on the field to the amount that the highest amount of stacks are. Meaning that if you have 3 enemies, one of them has 4 stacks and the other ones have 2 stacks, all of the enemies are going to have 4 stacks when you apply the ultimate, which is really good to get some extra damage on them. Plus, when you use his ultimate, he creates a zone for 3 turns that's going to damage all enemies, and while the zone is active, it's going to make those enemies take 15% more ultimate damage, and it also has a 60% base chance of inflicting a stack of Ashen Roast when the enemies take action. And that chance can only occur up to 6 times for each time Jiaoqiu uses his ultimate. So once you'll get that chance 6 times, you will have to wait for the next ultimate use, but Jiaoqiu's ultimate only has a 100 energy cost, so it's not going to be too crazy to get that up a lot of the time. Then for Jiaoqiu's technique, he creates a dimension and once the dimension's up and you enter battle, enemies will take fire damage and they'll have a 100% base chance of being inflicted with a stack of Ashen Roast, which is really good to have that vulnerability buff right off the bat. Like, even if it's not maxed out at the beginning, having 15% right off the bat is very good. So now let's go to his traces. So for his first Ascension trace, Jiaoqiu gets 15 energy at the start of battle, which is just going to help more with his ultimate uptime. Then his second Ascension trace allows him to get an extra 60% attack for every 15% effect hit rate he has above 80%. and you can get up to a maximum attack increase of 240%. So that means above the 80% effect hit rate, you'll need an additional 60%, bringing your kind of stat goal to get the most out of this trace to be 140% with effect hit rate, which is a lot. But since there's light codes that give effect hit rate, you'll probably just have to, have one of those light codes on him, plus also just get lucky with like relic substats and things like that. Then his final trace allows him to inflict the highest number of Ash and Rose stacks present on the field to any enemy that enters combat while the ultimate is active. And this gives him extra value in Pure Fiction specifically, because it's pretty much going to guarantee that his debuff will be up at most times. The only time it might not be up is, well, yeah, it could be at the beginning of waves, but since he has a dimension, I could see it also being, depending on how his works, some dimensions work on each wave, some don't. So if his ends up working on each wave, then you'll have 100% uptime on it, which is absolutely crazy to have that much vulnerability debuff up at one time. So yeah, this is definitely going to help him for Pure Fiction there. Then lastly for Jiaoqiu, his stat traces give him 28% effect hit rate, 14.4% fire damage, and 5 speed, which are all going to be helpful for him to get the most out of his debuffs and get more actions in as well with the speed. So that's everything for Jiaoqiu. So let's go and take a look at Sparkle's kit now. Sparkle has a really strong kit to make pretty much any hypercarry DPS do significantly more damage. So her basic attack, it just damages a single enemy, and you'll pretty much never use it, to be honest, unless you're in a very niche scenario where you do somehow run out of skill points. I say somehow because we're going to get to that with her kit, because Sparkle is a very good character when it comes to creating skill points as well. So Sparkle's skill, it works very similarly to Bronya's, where she'll be able to advance an ally's action while also giving them a significant crit damage buff. I believe Bronya with her skill gives a regular damage buff, but for Sparkle she has crit damage, but Sparkle's advance is also only by 50%, whereas Bronya's is by 100. So because Sparkle only advances 50%, you do have to be a bit more aware of your speed tuning, because if your speeds aren't like properly tuned on your team with your DPS and your Sparkle, then you might run into situations where Sparkle's advance doesn't advance them far up enough. And it could put you into some annoying situations, but at least in my experience, it usually isn't too bad. Then next up, for Sparkle's talent, it's extremely valuable because, for one, it increases your maximum amount of skill points to 7, which means you're going to have more skill points available for plenty of SP negative DPS characters. And her skill also gives all allies a 2-turn damage increase each time any ally uses a skill point, and that buff can stack up to 3 times, which is just going to be overall better team damage. Which, I mean, if you're running your own hyper carry, this damage buff is really only going to mainly benefit the main DPS, but it is still a good buff to have. Then for her ultimate, she's able to recover 4 skill points just for free every time she uses her ultimate, which is insanely good for SP negative DPS characters, especially Imbiber Lune, who wants to use a ton of skill points all at once. So being able to get 4 back with her is going to be really good for those kinds of characters. And her ultimate also applies the Cypher effect to all allies, which also gives you an extra damage bonus for every stack of Sparkle's talent that's active, just giving you even more of a damage increase there. Then for Sparkle's technique, I kind of see it as an upgraded version of Seela's, because since Seela makes herself invisible and not able to be detected by enemies, Sparkle does that for the entire team. And when you start battle with her technique active, you also regenerate 3 skill points at the start of the battle, making you start out with 6, which is incredibly good, so you don't even have to worry about skill points at the beginning of battle either. So now to move into Sparkle's traces. The first trace gives her 10 extra energy when you use her basic attack, which I guess is nice if you run into those niche situations where you run out of skill points with her and her ultimate's not up, so that you can get some extra energy to get to her ultimate faster. But outside of that, you won't really use this too much. Then her second trace extends the duration of her skill's crit damage boost to the start of the target's next turn. Because right now, but without this trace, the way it works is you skill to advance someone forward, and then for that one attack, they get the crit damage boost, and then it's gone. But with this trace in mind, now you'll advance them forward, they'll get the crit damage boost, and then they have that crit damage boost until their next turn comes up. And this is really helpful specifically for follow-up characters and characters that can attack outside of their turn, because now they're going to get that extra crit damage on their follow-ups. So this is going to be really good for those characters. Then for her final trace, she gives all allies an unconditional 15% attack boost, but she also gives an additional attack buff to quantum allies based on how many quantum allies you have on the team. If you have one quantum ally with her, it's an extra 5%. 2 quantum allies will be a 15% attack buff, and if you have a full mono quantum team, you're giving a 30% attack buff from this trace. So she definitely does want to be on mono quantum. Mono quantum's not very strong right now though. But even without like a mono team, if you're running like one, if you're running some quantum allies, they can benefit from this as well. And of course, we'll see how mono quantum, progresses as they release more quantum characters for sure. But it is a bit weak right now, at least in my experience. Then lastly, her stat traces give her 28% HP, 24% crit damage, and 10% effect res, which are going to help with the survivability, as well as the extra crit damage helping for her skills scaling for the buff. So that's everything for Sparkle's kit. So now let's move into my thoughts on which of these characters you should pull for, or if you should just skip straight up. Overall, I think both characters have a ton of value, despite how awful that their 4-star roster is going to be on their banner besides Gwenifin. But I think if you are going to pull, it really is just going to come down to what your account needs the most. So if we're starting out here with Jiaoqiu, I think his debuffs are going to be extremely helpful, specifically if you have Acheron, which I know a lot of people have Acheron because of how good she is. And not only will his debuffs help her get her ultimate faster, since she gets her ultimate through allies inflicting debuffs, but his vulnerability debuffs through Ash and Roast are going to help Acheron do way more damage. So if you if you run a team of Acheron, Jiaoqiu, and then you can run like Silverwolf, for example, or Pela for defense shred, you're going to be getting some crazy damage with that, because as I said before, vulnerability and defense shred are calculated differently at different times in the damage formula. So you're going to get a crazy amount more value of having Jiaoqiu with a defense shred character as opposed to having 2 defense shred characters. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. But outside of Acheron teams, let's say you're not running Acheron and you don't have her, you can also find a place for Jiaoqiu as a support on a dot team, because he does also have the burn dot from Ash and Roast, which can be detonated by Kafka, as well as characters who can benefit from debuffs a lot, like Dr. Ratio, because having the Ash and Roast on will be another debuff to improve the consistency of his follow-up attack. So that could be another type of comp. I don't know how much I'll be able to test it, since I myself probably am not going for Jiaoqiu, but I feel like that can also be an option as well for him. Then next up, in Sparkle's case, as I said, she works extremely well in pretty much every hypercarry team there, because of the crit damage and attack buff she can give regardless of which hypercarry DPS you're using. But I think her highest value right now is when you're running her with SP negative DPS characters like Imbiber, Lune, Jing Yuan, and Seela, for example, since she is able to provide those extra skill points. And not only that does she give them the extra crit damage and attack and extra skill points, but she does also have that unconditional skill point maximum increase to 7 skill points. So if you're running those two with SP neutral or SP positive, other characters on the team, like for your sustain and whatever other support you have, this is also going to be really helpful, because you're going to be able to hold more skill points at a time so that you can use them when you need to with your skill point negative DPS. And outside of hypercarry teams, Sparkle can still be valuable, but I do think that if you already have like top tier supports like Ruan, Mei, and Robin, or even Bronya as well, I wouldn't really call Sparkle necessary, but in the very least, compared to Bronya, she is a nice quality of life, bonus if you wanted to use her, because I've had a pretty solid amount of experience using both Bronya and Sparkle, and I usually do prefer Sparkle just because, like, sure, the advance isn't as much, but I do end up preferring Sparkle because the skill points give you a nice sense of comfort in certain teams, whereas if you're running Bronya instead, you can run into situation, even though I have Bronya at E1 S1, where she can get some skill points back as well. I do find Sparkle to be a bit more consistent in that regard. But at the end of the day, I think that it's important for you to choose the character that you not only like the most, but also will be the most valuable for your account if you are looking to be able to clear the end game content and like make account progression. But if you're in a situation where your account is good on supports, like you have solid debuffers already, you have some of the higher tier Harmony supports, and you feel like Sparkle is not necessary for you, then I absolutely think that saving is going to be the play here. Because if you're looking for a DPS option, we have Fei Xiao coming up in 2.5. And if you're looking for an abundance option, you have Huo right now for about another week, and then you have Linksha coming out in the second half of 2.5. So you are going to have some pretty solid options coming for those kind of roles. So if you aren't looking for support, I definitely think waiting is going to be the play. Save up your Jades, see how much you can get before 2.5 drops. And once we actually get the official information about Fei Xiao's kit, Linksha's kit, I am going to be covering that on the channel as well. But overall, that is going to be it for my analysis of Jiaoqiu and Sparkle. And I really hope that this kind of video is helpful for you. I think people have generally been liking this kind of video to go over the characters. So let me know down in the comments who you're going to be pulling for. And if you enjoyed and want to see more content like this, definitely be sure to hit that subscribe button. But thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.